President Trump recently cited from the Oval Office statistics about the state of the U.S. education system. What he didn't say is that we know about student achievement levels thanks to the data gathered by the Education Department itself. One of the government's most vital activities is the gathering of reliable statistics to guide policy. My next guest says the quality of national statistics has become a concern. Consultant Nancy Potok is the former chief statistician of the United States, and she joins me now. Nancy, good to have you back.
Thanks so much, Tom. I'm really glad to be here.
And I want to dedicate this interview to someone we both knew, one of the great statistical people in government, and that is the late Ed Sondick, who was the National Center for Health Statistics director in his career, passed away untimely last year. And again, someone we both knew and respected a great deal. And this idea of the kind of gradual erosion of statistical capability, this didn't start with the Trump administration. This is something you've been concerned about for a while, correct?
Yes, that's true. And it really reflects a lack of attention and understanding of the great public good that federal statistics are and the critical role that they play. I think a lot of people are unaware that we have 13 designated principal statistical agencies spread across government. Most people are aware we have the Census Bureau, and they know about the census, and a lot of people know that the Bureau of Labor Statistics does the employment numbers. And maybe they even know that the Bureau of Economic Analysis generates these critical numbers about the economy like GDP. But they don't realize that there's an agency for health, for education, for transportation, agriculture, justice, science, innovation. There's even statistical agencies within the IRS and Social Security. They work together as a system. When I was the chief statistician of the United States, my job was to coordinate all of these agencies and the ones that do statistics that aren't even designated. There's about 100 other units embedded in agencies doing statistical work.
So what's happened to make the statistics in danger, do you feel? And I know you're working with the American Statistical Association on this.
We have a study team. We got a grant actually from the Sloan Foundation to start doing a multi-year measurement of the infrastructure and the interaction of the system as a whole. Because we realized, people talk about transportation infrastructure, for example, and highways and bridges, but the statistical infrastructure and the data infrastructure is kind of invisible to people. They use it, they're accessing it, but they don't see it like a crumbling bridge. So what we did was we put together a set of metrics that we wanted to measure year over year. How is the system doing? And kind of put out a report card type of thing. And so we put out our first report last July. I think the title maybe indicates our worries because it was called The Nation's Data at Risk.
We'll have a link to it, but what is the cause of this risk, do you think?
Well, we looked at 3 measures. What made them vulnerable and what we saw sort of came to pass, actually. Unfortunately, we found that there weren't enough resources being invested in modernization and allowing the agencies to innovate. All of their money and resources, for the most part, were going to maintain things that they'd been doing sometimes for half a century already. And they really needed to get that boost to invest to modernize. The second thing was that they didn't really have strong authorities in law. Some do, like the Census Bureau, of course. The census is embedded in the Constitution. Other agencies didn't have enough authority to allow them to have what we were looking for, which is professional autonomy. So they were vulnerable to political meddling in the numbers potentially, and didn't have that really strong wall up around their methodology and their ability to say these are high quality data, not these are data that support a particular political position.
We're speaking with Nancy Potok. She's former chief statistician of the United States. And this has been going on some time, and I'm getting the sense that your group and the study people might feel this is accelerating now as politics get rougher and rougher and kind of put us on strange territory.
Yeah, the things that we said, if we don't take action, we had action for Congress, for the agencies, for the cabinet agencies that house the statistical bureaus, for OMB, actually, the Office of Management and Budget, because that's where the chief statistician's office is. And the chief statistician in OMB needed to take some action too. And we said, if these things that we're recommending don't happen, we're going to see some serious deterioration. And unfortunately, all of the things that we predicted that were vulnerable, that could really affect our ability to produce statistics, have been starting to come to pass.
What are some of those things?
I can give you some examples. So let's take the education statistics, because I think that is one that a lot of people have suddenly become aware of. So within the Department of Education, there's the National Center for Education Statistics. And I would say it was a victim of collateral damage of the effort to downsize and eventually eliminate the education department itself. But one of the things that we had found was that they were particularly vulnerable because they didn't have strong independent authorities in statute. They had a really, and I know this is kind of very inside the Beltway, but they had a really high ratio of contractors to staff. And of course, we said that's not good. It makes them very vulnerable. And when all the contracts at the education department were canceled recently, so there were a lot of very important educational data collections that were in progress, and the vast majority of them were all being done by contractors. This is information that's collected from schools, from principals, student assessments, all kinds of things that lead into the nation's report card. That's how people know how students are doing. Really important information that affects how billions of dollars ultimately are distributed out to school districts.
Sure.
The school pulse survey that was measuring the effects of the pandemic on students. So people don't think, oh, this is contracted out. You just canceled the contracts on these ongoing surveys. So one survey got canceled. There were 600 interviewers out in the field who worked for the contractor doing this, who suddenly got fired. Everything stopped. And now we won't have the information.
Yeah, and on some of the issues related to modernization, those are all visible in the Census Department because the levels of mail-in surveys keep dropping. I think this is the problem for the Bureau of Labor Statistics also.
It's what they call the response rate. It's how many people respond who are actually included in a sample of a survey. Of course, a census goes out to everyone, and there's billions of dollars that are spent to try to get everyone in the country to respond to that. But most surveys don't have that size of a budget, and you can't put that level of effort. So you depend on people trusting the government, right? You want people to know that when they give their information to a statistical agency, it's highly protected. There are laws that go far beyond the Privacy Act that specifically protect statistical information from being used for any other purpose except for statistics. So not for law enforcement, not for tax enforcement, none of those things once it becomes statistical data. Trust in government has dropped considerably, and people are not as civic-minded. And we've seen this trend over the years of people stopping to respond to these surveys. It is a big problem because it makes it more expensive if you have to keep going back to get the response over and over again. You have to pay the interviewers.
Yeah, I got a survey in the mail, or a barcode to a survey from a company called RTI, and it was working on behalf, it said, of a government agency, and there was a dollar bill in there as an incentive, which surprised me.
In the interest of disclosure, I have done work with RTI. I was a senior fellow there for a year.
So it's legit.
They're a highly reputable company, yeah.
All right, good to know. Well, then, are you getting any traction in Congress from any members? I mean, I won't even ask about the administration, but Congress.
Well, here's the challenge. Federal statistics need a champion. They need a member of Congress who really cares beyond the census itself. You always get a lot of attention around the census. Sometimes not always wanted attention, but you get a lot of attention. But, in the heyday of the federal statistical system, there were some members of Congress who really understood this value as a public good. and they were staunch defenders of the system, and they made sure it was